The National Electrical Code, or NEC, has specific requirements for underground conduit installations. Let's review those requirements, focusing on depth and conduit type. For driveways, the NEC mandates a minimum depth of 24 inches, as stated in Article 300.5 done. In other areas, the minimum depth is 18 inches according to Article 300.5 D2. Regarding the type of conduit, Schedule 40 PVC or its equivalent is required as stated in Article 352.10 burn. While the NEC doesn't specifically address fiber optic cables and underground conduit, the general requirements for conduit type and depth still apply. So, how does this relate to a scenario where there's existing conduit that might not meet these standards? If the existing conduit is thin-walled, meaning it's less than Schedule 40, and it's buried at a depth of less than 24 inches under a driveway, it likely violates NEC requirements. Now, someone might argue that the existing conduit is grandfathered in because it was installed before the current NEC requirements were adopted. However, this argument typically doesn't hold if the conduit is deemed unsafe or doesn't meet minimum code standards. So, what's the recommended course of action in such a case? Firstly, inspect the conduit. Verify the type and thickness of the conduit, and accurately measure its depth, especially under the driveway. Secondly, document the violations. Take photographs and detailed measurements to clearly show the code violations. Thirdly, contact the authority having jurisdiction, also known as the AHJ. This is your local building inspector or electrical inspector. Notify them of this situation. They will assess whether the conduit meets the code and issue any necessary citations or orders for repairs. To summarize, the process consists of these steps: 1. Verifying the conduit type and depth, 2. Documenting any violations of the NEC, and 3. Reporting those violations to the local authority having jurisdiction. The NEC mandates specific depths for underground conduit, 24 inches under driveways and 18 inches in other areas. It also requires the use of Schedule 40 PVC conduit or its equivalent. Even though the NEC doesn't directly address fiber optics and underground conduit, these general requirements apply. If an existing conduit doesn't meet these requirements, especially regarding depth and conduit type, it's important to document the violations and notify the local authority having jurisdiction. Remember, safety and code compliance are paramount. A crucial aspect is understanding the role of the authority having jurisdiction. This is the local governing body responsible for enforcing electrical codes and standards. They have the final say in whether an installation meets code requirements and what actions are needed to correct any violations. When you contact the AHJ, be prepared to provide them with all the documentation you've gathered, including photographs, measurements, and details about the existing conduit. They may conduct their own inspection to verify the information and determine the appropriate course of action. It's important to cooperate fully with the AHJ and follow their instructions. Failing to do so can result in further complications, fines, or even legal action. In some cases, the AHJ may allow for certain variances or exceptions to the code, but this is usually based on specific circumstances and requires a formal request and approval. It's always best to err on the side of caution and comply with the code whenever possible. Another important consideration is the potential for damage to the underground conduit. If the conduit is damaged, it can compromise the protection of the cables inside and create a safety hazard. This is especially true if the conduit is located in a high-traffic area where it's more susceptible to being struck by vehicles or heavy equipment. If you suspect that the conduit may be damaged, it's important to have it inspected by a qualified electrician or contractor. They can assess the extent of the damage and recommend the necessary repairs or replacements. Keep in mind that repairing or replacing underground conduit can be a complex and costly undertaking. It may involve excavating the area around the conduit, removing the damaged sections, and installing new conduit. It's important to hire a contractor with experience in underground conduit work to ensure that the job is done properly and safely. Before starting any work on underground conduit, it's essential to identify and locate all underground utilities in the area. This can be done by contacting your local utility companies and requesting a utility locate. They will come to the site and mark the location of any underground lines, such as gas, water, and electrical. This is important to prevent damage to these utilities during excavation and to ensure the safety of workers. In addition to the NEC requirements, there may be local codes or regulations that apply to underground conduit installations. It's important to check with your local building department to determine if there are any additional requirements that you need to follow. These local codes may address issues such as the type of backfill material that's used, the method of compaction, and the depth of cover required. By following all applicable codes and regulations, you can ensure that your underground conduit installation is safe, reliable, and compliant. It's also a good idea to keep records of all inspections, permits, and other documentation related to the installation. This can be helpful if you ever need to make repairs or modifications to the conduit in the future. When installing fiber optic cables in underground conduit, it's important to follow the manufacturer's recommendations for installation and handling. Fiber optic cables are delicate and can be damaged if they are not handled properly. Avoid bending the cables too sharply or pulling them too forcefully. Use a cable lubricant to reduce friction and make it easier to pull the cables through the conduit. Also, be sure to properly seal the ends of the conduit to prevent moisture and debris from entering. Moisture can damage the fiber optic cables and reduce their performance. Debris can clog the conduit and make it difficult to pull new cables in the future. Regularly inspect the underground conduit to ensure that it's in good condition and that there are no signs of damage or deterioration. Pay particular attention to the areas where the conduit enters and exits the ground. These areas are most susceptible to damage from weather and other environmental factors. If you notice any problems with the conduit, have them repaired promptly. Addressing small problems early can prevent them from becoming bigger and more costly to fix. When planning an underground conduit installation, it's important to consider the long-term needs of your network. Will you need to add more cables in the future? If so, it's a good idea to install a larger conduit than you currently need. This will make it easier to add new cables without having to dig up the conduit again. Also, consider the potential for future changes in technology. Will the type of fiber optic cables you're using today still be relevant in a few years? If not, you may want to install a conduit that can accommodate different types of cables. By thinking ahead and planning for the future, you can avoid costly and disruptive upgrades down the road. The NEC is updated every 3 years, so it's important to stay up to date on the latest changes and revisions. You can purchase a copy of the NEC from the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA. You can also find information about the NEC on the NFPA website. Many local libraries also have copies of the NEC available for reference. In addition to the NEC, there are other industry standards and best practices that can help you ensure a safe and reliable underground conduit installation. These standards cover topics such as grounding, bonding, and surge protection. Following these standards can help you protect your equipment and personnel from electrical hazards. When working with electrical equipment, it's important to always follow proper safety procedures. Wear appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE, such as gloves, safety glasses, and hearing protection. Never work on live electrical circuits unless you're properly trained and authorized. If you're not comfortable working with electrical equipment, hire a qualified electrician to do the work for you. Electricity can be dangerous, and it's not worth taking risks. Remember that the information provided here is for general guidance only and should not be considered a substitute for professional advice. Always consult with a qualified electrician or contractor before starting any electrical work. They can assess your specific situation and provide you with the best recommendations for your needs. Underground conduit installations can be complex and challenging, but by following the NEC requirements, local codes, and industry best practices, you can ensure a safe, reliable, and compliant installation. Don't hesitate to seek professional help if you're unsure about any aspect of the project. There are many resources available to help you, including electricians, contractors, inspectors, and code officials. Take advantage of these resources to ensure that your underground conduit installation is done right. Finally, remember that safety is always the top priority. Never compromise safety for cost or convenience. A safe installation is a reliable installation, and it's worth the extra effort to do things right. The long-term benefits of a safe and reliable underground conduit installation will far outweigh any short-term costs or inconveniences. So, take your time, do your research, and follow all the applicable codes and standards. Your efforts will be rewarded with a safe, reliable, and compliant installation that will serve you well for years to come.